One company stands out as quite different from the others, Energy Vault. If you haven't heard of Energy Vault, they began looking at how gravity can be utilized to help us with energy storage.
We looked at the energy storage market and looked at what today is the basis of all energy storage. 90% of it are these pumped hydroelectric dams that are based on gravity. So we looked at coming to market and using gravity with the same concept of the pumped hydroelectric dams, but instead of water that's traversing up and down and generating the electricity, we've developed these eco bricks, not using concrete, and a structure essentially to lift and lower them.
I have a question for you. What do you think is the single energy storage product or mechanism that represents more than 90% of today's energy storage around the world? Did you guess water? That's right. Hydroelectric dams have been the prevailing methodology for storing energy in long duration, easy to release and reuse format for over a century. And around the world, increasingly, we're running into lots of resistance for logical reasons. We can't keep flooding pristine forests and covering towns just to create hydroelectric power. And we're also having problems with gathering enough water to generate the power we need through hydroelectric alone. That's where a novel new energy storage technology comes to play. If you haven't heard of the company Energy Vault, I recently interviewed their CEO, Robert Piconi, and he talks about a new eco brick that they've created, which leverages gravity as hydroelectric storage does, but in buildings instead of in large dams. I was fascinated with the concept and the execution for Energy Vault. Many of us have been watching as Energy Vault has evolved from these large, awkward-looking cranes to now what looks more like a central building, like a data center with elevator shafts. I encourage you to lean in and learn more about this alternative to long-duration energy storage from a company that, well, is making waves in the energy transition. If you're new here to Suncast, I want to say thank you for lending us your ears and the only non-renewable resource that you possess. That's your time. Promise to take good care of it. You're going to learn so much from Robert Piconi today. And we've got more than 650 episodes just like this in the back catalog over at mysuncast.com. I'd encourage you to check those out. But for now, let's get down to business as we dig into another tactical, practical episode here on Suncast. How would you describe the problem that you have created Energy Vault to solve? What is it that you see that is really standing in our way in the evolution of our industry?
We're focused on energy storage, which is the critical element of allowing renewables to become more well deployed across the whole planet and begin to replace our reliance on fossil fuels.
There are many who perhaps think they know Energy Vault or maybe haven't looked deep enough but have heard of the name Energy Vault. Why don't you do me a favor and introduce Energy Vault and why the company that you founded is going to help solve the problem you've just enunciated?
We founded the company with a mission of decarbonization and a specific focus in solving that on energy storage. And energy storage is a very topical element today that is, I think, gets a lot of attention because it's a very difficult problem to solve. And I think people universally now understand that while wind and solar is getting deployed now in mass, unless we can store those same electrons that are generated in a cost-effective and a sustainable way, it's going to be difficult for wind and solar to become dispatchable power like the current forms of energy generation. So I think as we looked at solving that problem, there were three main parameters that were important for us. One was just the urgency of time. So back in 2017, when we were solving this problem and thinking about different ways to look at it, we knew and felt the urgency. Bill Gross, one of the co-founders, had been the last 15 years making companies that were focused on solar technologies and optimization and innovation in renewables broadly. So we saw this problem coming, and very important that we develop something that could initially get to market very quickly for this aspect of time. The second thing was economics. So we wanted to also have a solution that could be deployed without subsidies and still be economical and still
Mhm.
make the equation where you could still look at deploying wind and solar, applying storage, and have that be somehow either on par or better than the prior fossil fuel. And then the third thing for us that was important was sustainability. So we didn't want to solve one problem in renewable energy storage
Mhm.
and create any environmental liability. So for those things, we looked at the energy storage market and looked at what today is the basis even of all energy storage. 90% of it are these pumped hydroelectric dams that are based on gravity. And so we looked at coming to market initially with a solution that can be a long duration solution and using gravity with the same concept of the pumped hydroelectric dams, but instead of water that's traversing up and down and generating the electricity,
Yeah.
we've developed these eco bricks, these environmentally friendly bricks, not using concrete and a structure essentially to lift and lower them. So we developed that and brought that to market through a series of funding rounds. In parallel, we were developing the software platform to optimize and run that system, but also to be a platform where we could distribute and deploy any energy storage technology, whether we developed it or not. And so that software platform is what we've used to also address
Mm.
the short duration market with, for example, lithium-ion batteries, where we have a
Right.
unique way we solve that problem. And also even the ultra long duration or multi-day storage need, for example, for microgrids, for backup systems, for
Exactly.
cities,
Right.
or for data centers. So that's how we evolved the portfolio now and have essentially began deploying solutions last year in our first year.
That's brilliant. One of the things that most folks who are familiar with Energy Vault will recognize is the concept of Energy Vault being focused on gravity-based technology and these eco bricks. I want to just see if I heard everything correctly here, because I like to try and summarize before I go on. Underlying the decision to build the business were three parameters. Time. We are in a sense of urgency. As you pointed out, Bill Gross has started numerous companies, many of which are focused on solving climate crises. Economics. We're in a world where traditionally, and even in our industry very commonly, the technology is bolstered by incentives. It's bolstered by, if not tax incentives, then some other economic bolster, crutch, if you will. And there are definitely markets, I worked in Latin America a lot, where solar in and of itself performs at grid parity or better compared with the alternatives, fossil fuels as an example. So how do we deploy without subsidies and still be economically feasible? And then the third, sustainability. And you actually hit me with something that I didn't expect. Don't solve problems that create others. I see that as I immediately, my mind went to lithium, because everyone's like, oh, Chicken Little, the sky's falling, we're using cobalt. And they're not wrong. Lithium is not a sustainable, in quotes, long-term solution to our energy storage needs at the scale that we need them. But pumped hydro has its own challenges, right? It has its own. We not only can we not scale our storage needs with pumped hydro, but it is generally at the scale of dammed water storage, extremely disastrous to the ecology around hydro systems. So that took me by surprise. As I know that the pumped hydro is still the largest source of renewable energy in most of the world. So I think I heard you right. And then the gravity-based system, which we'll talk about, and how that evolved, and software, which is itself the enabler of the evolution of Energy Vault, as I understand it. Is that accurate up to now?
Yeah, you got it.
Could you enunciate for me, who predominantly do you sell to, and what problems do you solve for those clients?
We really sell to three main groups. And I would start with the public utilities. So these are the organizations that I think are most directly known by both residences, commercials, businesses, because they're providing the power. Okay.
Yeah.
But there's a second group that serves them that are the independent power providers, that are the ones that are most actively deploying renewables or standalone storage.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the NL Green Powers of the world, for example. They're the largest global one. Right here in the U.S., you've got Jupiter Power, for example, that is the largest provider in ERCOT, which is the largest storage market in the United States. By the way, both of those players happen to be customers of ours. So that's the second group on the independent power side. And then the third bucket, which for I think is a little unique with us serving because of the nature of our investor base, also that started early on, are the large industrials that are large consumers of energy that are making their own clean energy transition. So the mining companies, for example, that are looking at different ways to power their trucks and locomotives, or to power their operations and plants, any 24/7 manufacturing facility, and even large players like Saudi Aramco that are some of the traditional players in oil and gas that are making this transition. So that area is fundamental, important, and even gets down to the folks that are looking and charged with making sustainable aviation fuel or new green fuels to help power our economy. So those are the three main buckets.
Can you give us a little bit of insight into how you funded the company to begin with, you, Bill, and perhaps you named the third co-founder, and what were the early milestones that you were looking for and that then follow-on investors were looking for that led you to where you're at now, a publicly traded company serving customers like Enel and PG&E?
So our third co-founder, I should mention, Andrea Pedretti, who's our current chief technology officer as well. So it was him. He was working with Bill Gross already, had been collaborating, and I had known Bill for 7 or 8 years before. So we started with seed funding. Bill Gross founded Idealab, of course, which is the longest running technology incubator, I think, in the United States, out of Pasadena, California, arguably the most prominent. He's created over 100 companies. We got together around the idea, iterated it, and formed the company at the end of 2017. And we started right away with a 1/4 scale idea of this, of a crane, essentially, that would lift and lower blocks. We tested the software out and then spent a lot of time looking at how could we make these composite blocks that were large, 35 metric tons were the first iteration of the product. How can we make them and not use concrete? Because again, back to one of those three.
That's why you call it the eco brick, right?
Yeah. So could we use material science and solve and make these blocks in a way that would not require the production of concrete? And in fact, we collaborated with Cemex, which is a large materials company, in their material science lab in Switzerland, which is where we founded the company, and found a way to just use the dirt from the ground, for example, to make the blocks. But also we could use waste materials. So there was a really neat circular economic part of what we were developing early on. And so we really wanted to test all of those out and prove out some of the economics at a 1/4 scale. We built the model. Once we did that, and we did that with a Series A funding, and we proved out the main premise around the software, moving around the blocks, and that we could make these blocks sustainably and therefore also avoid the cost of concrete, which is high.
Right.
We then went to a Series B to go build essentially a commercial scale system. So not starting with 250 kilowatt or a megawatt, but a full 5 megawatt system. So we did a large Series B funding. It was one of the largest in energy storage ever. It was 110 million, as announced, with SoftBank.
Wow, that would still be one of the largest.
Yes, yep, absolutely. If you're going to serve utilities, you have to be utility scale, and utilities don't like to take risks, as you know, because they're providing a critical service or providing power. You can't just shut it off, right?
Yeah.
You have a lot of problems. So you must have a solution that's been proven and grid interconnected, ideally, to be able to go begin to address that market, whether with IPPs or utilities. So we went right to scale, and that was another big milestone for us. And through COVID, even through COVID, which was a very difficult period, we got our first 5 megawatt system grid interconnected in July 2020.
Oh, wow.
So if you think about that, and this is in about 2 years' time from essentially January 2018 is when we really started in Switzerland. By mid-2020, 2.5 years, we had our first system up and running at commercial scale, grid interconnected. So we commissioned it the second half of 2020. And along the way, we listened to customers. Customers came to see the site. We had a lot of videos then that we used because it was COVID. Still, we were in that phase, but that got a lot of interest from the NL Green Powers of the world, and brought other investors on along the way, like Saudi Aramco, the largest energy company in the world, BHP, the largest mining company in the world, out of Australia, but has a big global footprint. And so that was really important as a proof of tech, grid interconnected, and I think unique as we looked at energy storage and getting it proven out early, and then finally, I'd say in getting close to the decision to take the company public, we developed the new EVX design, and we announced that in conjunction with Saudi Aramco's investment. So those were, I think, some of the early milestones before the IPO, before we started to look at taking the company public.
How much was raised in the seed with Idea Lab and the Series A that got you to proof of concept and ready to do that huge Series B?
Sure. We raised a total of about 12 to 15 million, which was not a lot when you think about it.
That's a big jump.
Yeah, and
that's amazing.
Yeah,
and did you have early customers in that Series A round that were doing on-site testing, like in strategics?
No early. We had a Menlo Park-based VC NeoTribe that led the Series A, and a few other private investors and Idea Lab investors. I personally invested in that round, for example. So this was to get this 1/4 scale done. So that's why the Series A was sized the way it was. Of course, the big jump was to the Series B, where we wanted to go right to commercial scale, because the feedback, Nico, was just amazing from customers. As we started to speak to customers around the world, we were still a team of only 15 to 20 people back then. But we started listening and seeding customers and getting out to shows. And people really responded positively to Gravity, because they all knew pumped hydro. They all loved it, but they needed a way to go build something that you could still build today. To your earlier points of the environmental ecosystem problems with building pumped hydro, and it's still it wasn't very cost effective. A lot of concrete, so a lot of issues to solve there. And so people loved what we were doing. We got great customer feedback, and that led us to accelerate to a larger Series B. And given we felt this urgency to get to market.
A business is half coming up with a good idea and the other half selling it. And I think it's genius, and I hadn't heard this from you guys yet. So obviously the narrative has evolved as well. It's genius that you didn't go after traditional storage in the like renewables or solar sense. Like, nobody in the solar industry talks about hydro. It's like an afterthought. It's a whole other sector. It's a different wheelhouse. Can you put me in the room where you guys are ideating around, like, what's the real thing that we are going to be evolving from, or offsetting, or attacking, that people can get their head around? Because I think that piece as an entrepreneur is so critical, to be able to say, like, we aren't going to be able to walk in with a model of this. So we have to model it in their minds. We have to give them something they can attach to and say, not that, this. Can you put me in the room for that?
Sure. Yeah. By the way, it's a fascinating discussion and a great question, because, and this is so important, I think, for entrepreneurs, as people look at evaluating technologies, creating technology, but looking at what really is going to go meet a growth market segment that you could sell something at a price where there's a profit left, right? So this is fundamental. And it first of all, it started with the market. So you really need to form a thesis. You have to have conviction on the market you're serving, that there's going to be ideally a large market need, and for something that you could bring to the table, where maybe it's not being served properly. And that's, I think, as we looked at storage, to your point on lithium-ion, there was pumped hydro, and then there was lithium-ion, and nothing else getting deployed. I mean, that was the way it is. And by the way, we're not far from that today.
Yep.
And that was, that was 5 years ago. So as we looked at that, the first conviction we had to have is we believe there's going to be a growing and big market. We believe eventually the world's going to get more passionate and more purposeful on solving that problem. So that was a must believe. The third was, what type of technology can you use to serve this market? And knowing that the more renewable you get on the grid, if you believe that we're going to be putting more wind and solar on the grid, and we are, and we have been, you're going to need not only storage, but eventually longer duration storage. So today, most of the market in the US, 95% of the market, most all that's getting deployed, is solving this 2 to 4 hour problem of the time shifting. And that's why lithium-ion is the only real proven and deployable technology. It has some downsides. You mentioned some of them. Environmentally, there's some safety risks, and they degrade over time, right? So just like your laptop or cell phone. So, but as we looked at that, we knew we weren't going to just be one of the many players looking at, different chemistries to optimize and solve that may not work out, right? That have a
Mm-hmm.
long cycle, or you have to build manufacturing to build it. So even if you prove something worked in a lab, then you have to go put a ton of capex into building out manufacturing to build it. So we were thinking asset light, thinking proven because time was important, and getting a thesis on, do we think eventually long duration is going to be more important? And that's what led us to begin with gravity, looking at gravity and uniquely, rethinking pumped hydro and to do something more economical, more scalable, more round trip efficient, and lower cost over time on a levelized basis. So that's why we started there, but always with software. If you know Bill Gross, you know anything he ever does, there's always a software component.
Yeah.
And it's just because of the what's happened with computing power and what you can do with software that it not only allows you to save money, but all the automation and the things you can do to get to market quickly. So that was the premise, and knowing that software component was going to enable us, because we also realized early on there was no silver bullet in storage. And really, Nico, shame on us as an industry, and this may surprise you to hear me say this. I'm sure there'll be a few of those things on this call. But we are behind as an industry in innovating to solve this problem. Maybe think about it. We have lithium-ion that's being deployed, but really nothing else in volume today because of economics or sustainability and just getting to scale.
I'd love to know what you are learning from this interview with Robert and the many other interviews that we have here, brought to you on Suncast and Suncast Media. Somewhere around here or down in the description, you'll see links to other episodes, including that long version that I referred to of the deep dive with Robert Piconi, not only about the business, but the man behind the business, the life and times of Robert Piconi, as it were. It was a fascinating interview that we released in October of 2023. Hope that you'll take some time to watch that and the many other clean energy leaders on the front lines of the energy transition. If you'd like more resources or some of the research that we produced in conjunction with getting ready for this interview, check it out at the show notes page of mysuncast.com. That's also where you could find out more about our sponsors or learn how you could partner with us to reach thousands of our solar warriors and climate champions twice a week, just like they do. Find out more at mysuncast.com/sponsor. And remember, you are what you listen to. Thanks again for showing up, Solar Warrior. It's half the battle.